What's going on, everybody? It's Rusty here with Budget Vintage. We played a little 8-person tournament over at Mavericks today. This is Saturday the 27th. And I want to talk about the deck I played and kind of give you a little bit of a tournament report. I'm really excited about this deck. I actually think it's really cool. I was skeptical if I was actually going to play it in our main league that's going on right now, because I'm trying to put up some good results and get a good finish there, and I wasn't quite sure if this was good enough for it, but after playing it today, it felt pretty reasonable, and I think it's got legs, so I'm going to try to iterate on it, and I might play it Monday night and get some more information to let you know how it goes. Before we do that, a little bit of bookkeeping, or really just an exciting thing to share. We now have on channelfireball.com an article written talking about $30 budget vintage. Our own servo token writes for Channel Fireball sometimes, and he got an article up today. So go ahead and check it out. It's kind of an overview of the format, talking about how it fits into Magic as a greater ecosystem and why he loves the format, as well as sharing some really cool deck lists. If you just heard that, there's fireworks going on tonight. It's Saturday night. I guess Monday is Memorial Day, so there's fireworks tonight, I guess. Not like scheduled fireworks, just my neighbors. Hopefully it's not too bad. I'll review it. If it's awful, maybe I'll think about editing them out, but I would bet that I do not edit those out because I am lazy. So anyway, continuing, definitely check out that article. Very cool. I think it indicates very good things for the future of the format and, kind of spreading the love, spreading the information, getting more people involved. We also did a 10-person spell table tournament this Thursday. My good friend Scuffle was kind enough to host me on his Twitch channel, so we were actually able to stream it, and I think that we'll probably do that again. We both had a really good time. I think the viewers enjoyed it, so we'll probably do some more streams on his channel, and my friend Corey is interested as well, so we'll probably do a couple more tournaments and have them host me so that we can get the word out and showcase this a little bit. But jumping into the deck. So this is a blue-black control deck, which we've seen some of before. A couple different versions of blue-black running around. Very interesting. But this one specifically is built around Mindsplice Apparatus. Or even more informationally, it's really built around Mystical Teachings. I think that a lot of you are probably familiar with Mystical Teachings. This is kind of a fan favorite card, I think. I think there are a lot of people who just really enjoy the play patterns of it, the grindiness of it, the toolbox nature of it. They're all really cool things, and it makes for a really cool card. Unfortunately, I think on face value, Mystical Teachings is not very good. Probably not good enough for budget vintage just on its own. 4 mana and 6 mana is a lot, even at instant speed. It's nice that you can get whatever you need in the moment, but if you're getting a cast down or a sudden edict off of it, you're still investing 6 mana in a removal spell, and I just don't think that that's a price that's kind of acceptable in really any format, truthfully. So we've seen Mystical Teachings in Modern with Wilderness Reclamation, and I think that's an option here. My issue with that is, first off, Wilderness Reclamation is expensive. It's about $2 each. We do actually have that's our budget. It is the subject of our Brewmasters Challenge this month, so we'll actually be collecting and sharing some lists from that pretty soon here. But yeah, like I said, it's about $8 for the full playset, and it puts you in green. And if you're playing that and Mystical Teachings, you're kind of forced to be a 3-color deck, which is doable, but you have to make some concessions in the mana base. So Will actually brought this to my attention, and I think this card is crazy. So it's very similar to Wilderness Rec. You don't immediately get your mana back. Wilderness Rec, you would play it on turn 4, ideally, and you would untap, and you'd have 4 mana up to do your interaction, whether it be, some counter spells or just firing off a Memory Deluge. This requires a larger upfront investment, but I think it generates more mana, because once you get to 2 or 3 counters on it, it's really easy to chain Mystical Teachings. You can go like Mystical Teachings for a cast down, cast the cast down, then flashback Mystical Teachings for another Mystical Teachings. Or I've got 1 Gifts Ungiven. I don't know if that's the right number. It could actually go up, but I have 1 Gifts Ungiven as a Mystical Teachings target. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the idea of this deck is to leverage Mindsplice Apparatus to make Mystical Teachings a powerful value engine. I think that the discount is really important because I don't think that this card is generally worth the mana cost otherwise. So in our blue-black control shell, it's pretty normal, I think, for this format. There are Preordains, Baleful Strixes, which is pretty big pretty big money investment, but I think it's worthwhile. Counterspells, I did trim one for budget reasons, although I changed my sideboard before the event, and I probably could have fit that one in. I just put a loose focus in. Drown in the Loch, this is interesting. I don't know how good it is without any Thought Scours. I'm really relying on just the course of the game to fill up my opponent's graveyard, so it's not really live on turn 2. I don't know if that's correct. I like it because it lets me increase my density of counterspells and spot removal, because it plays double duty. Sudden Edict, this is really a Mystical Teachings target. I think that mostly True Name Nemesis is what I'd be concerned about. But there are other things that need edicted sometimes, like Sphinx of the Steel Wind or Inkwell Leviathan. The Salinity Vision is just a little extra value. I think that I want to play a lot of lands because I always want to have access to my first 4 lands. And then obviously Salinity Vision is pretty good once you have an active Mindsplice Apparatus. There's a Hullbreacher. That is part of a package with Commit Memory that I'll talk about when it comes time to talk about winning the game. As far as winning the game goes, my only threats are 1 Hullbreaker Horror. Technically, you can win with a Baleful Strix. I'm not going to count that. So 1 Hullbreaker Horror, 1 Hullbreacher, and 2 Tar Pits. I don't want to play very many win conditions in this deck. I want to dedicate as few slots as possible, to the point where I think the Hullbreaker Horror might actually be an over-dedication of win conditions. It is a good card. It's got Flash, so I can tutor it off Mystical Teachings, which is nice. And it can't be countered, and it's pretty good at protecting itself. I think ideally you want to, when it's time to win the game, you want to do so by flashing in a Hullbreaker Horror with like 2 pieces of interaction up, or if not interaction, at least spells you can cast at instant speed to bounce their interaction back to their hand. But I do think you want to have access to some counterspell, because if they have a Swords to Plowshares, then it's only 1 mana to cast, right? So even if you're bouncing with Hullbreaker Horror back to their hand, you may have to do it multiple times. They may be able to afford to recast it. It's also a budget investment in $4.76. I don't actually know if this is the right win condition. I suspect that it may not be, and we'll talk about that in a bit. We also have some Hieroglyphic Illuminations as card draw. I really like that they can cycle for 1 mana to kind of act as an additional cantrip. In the early turns, take your land drops. I'm not sure that's needed. I think these could maybe be better used as other things. 2 Languish Main, 2 Side. I think this is actually a pretty good board wipe. It catches most threats in the format, mono black namely. But it's going to be good against most decks that are putting creatures on the board. And there's a Commit Memory here. This is partially so we don't deck, but it's also a combo with Hullbreacher. So going into that, I didn't get to do it tonight, but I thought about it. I did sideboard this out sometimes. The combo here is Hullbreacher and Commit Memory. Obviously this is good. If you can get it to go off, you draw a fresh 7 and put your opponent on 1 card in hand, right? Because it can only draw 1 card, and you get 6 treasures. So ideally, you have a Mindsplice Apparatus producing some additional mana, and that allows you to cast the Memory half for as low as 2 mana. Ideally, holding up some interaction so that you can protect your Hullbreacher and then getting a fresh hand and 6 more mana, which is probably going to let you win the game. I like that as kind of a win condition, because it doesn't literally win the game, but at that point you've got a fresh grip, you have a Mindsplice Apparatus going, you probably have counter spells, and your opponent has 1 card in hand, drawing their second one on their turn. You're far enough ahead that it should be game over. Now, I think this is a cool inclusion, because here we're going to assume we have an active Mindsplice Apparatus. This deck plays a fine game without Mindsplice Apparatus. My final game against Will, we got a draw, but I think I was ahead when we went to time. And I didn't have a Mindsplice in play for the majority of the game, and it felt fine. Like, I was still playing a pretty reasonable deck. Actually, a lot of my interaction doesn't get discounted by Mindsplice Apparatus. Like, you're only saving 1 mana on Cast Down, you're not benefiting on Counterspell, Drown in the Loch, and I think that's all fine. I think that the Mindsplice Apparatus is still worth it. So with a Mindsplice Apparatus in play, assumed, let's say it's on 2, right? You can Mystical Teachings for 2 mana, you can get Gifts Ungiven. Then spend 2 mana on Gifts Ungiven. My idea for a Gifts Ungiven pile, and this is going to take some time to figure out, I think I'm going to want like 4 removal spells so that I can always get a removal spell off of Gifts Ungiven. So there's some room to tinker with this. But my kind of ideal pile is going to be Commit Memory, Mystical Teachings, again, Memory Deluge, which is very funny with Mindsplice Apparatus, and Cling to Dust. I actually like Cling to Dust a lot in this deck as a value piece. So when that happens, the important thing, so you're going to get 2 cards to your hand and 2 cards to the graveyard. You're going to get access to a Commit Memory, whether it goes to hand and you have to cast it or it goes to graveyard, and you're going to get access to a Mystical Teachings flashback, or just, the card in your hand. So with that, you can then use the Mystical Teachings to get your Hull Breacher, right? So let's say on your end step, I pay 2 mana for Mystical Teachings, then I pay 2 mana for Gifts. That's pretty reasonable, right? Then I'm set up to Teachings for Hull Breacher and threaten a Hull Breacher Commit Memory wheel, which is powerful. And I like that I'm only dedicating 2 slots to this, and I have a path through my 3 copies of Mystical Teachings to get gifts and then set that up. And that's powerful, right? Like, it's clearly powerful to cast Memory with a Hull Breacher in play. So I think that's kind of the primary win con of this deck, although I didn't do it today. And then Hull Breaker is just a way to close the door. Once you do the Commit Memory thing, I think you can just beat them to death with a Tar Pit if you have to. My sideboard has some additional win cons in Commence the Endgame and Lockmere Serpent. I think those are wrong. I just don't think those are correct. Lockmere Serpent's kind of cute. Commence is also kind of cute. I don't think they're very good. We'll circle back to that. I'll talk about my sideboard a little bit more. 2 More Languishes is good. March of Wretched Sorrow, this card played nicely. I really liked that it could be discounted with Mindsplice Apparatus. I got to fire it off for 11 against Mono Black, and just once you do that, you're super stabilized. Nemesis Trap, this is a fun one. It saw some Legacy play when Initiative was in its heyday. I was planning for there to be some Initiative today. I didn't see very much of it. I did play against Will, and he had 2 White Plumes in his Martyr Proc deck, so I did bring it in, and it was part of a Gifts Ungiven pile for removal. Soul Guides, it's fine. Graveyard interaction, in addition to the main deck Cling to Dust. 4 Spell Pierces, probably not the right amount of Spell Pierces, I should diversify. And the Filigree Silex, this card is cheaper than Ratchet Bomb. It's exactly functionally the same as Ratchet Bomb, except for being legendary. And it's got the cute synergy that sometimes, if I have 2 active Mindsplice Apparatus, it's actually pretty reasonable to get to 10 oil counters between the 2 of them and burn someone out with the Filigree Silex. I don't think it'll come up much, but as blue-black, I have trouble dealing with resolved artifacts and enchantments, and I think that the Filigree Silex deserves its slot on just being a Ratchet Bomb, and it's a little cute thing that could happen sometimes. The deck felt really good. I think that the Mindsplice Apparatus Mystical Teachings package is real. I think this deck can be tuned, but it felt like once I started to stabilize, which really just meant I got to 4 or 5 mana and had a Mindsplice in play, the game felt really, really unlosable from that point. I've seen games where Control has gotten to 4 or 5 lands. They've kind of survived the initial onslaught from their opponent, but then their opponent's able to just top deck better than them, or they don't find their their hieroglyphic illuminations at the right time, and they can die. But Mindsplice Apparatus gives you such a huge mana advantage that snowballs out of control. Once you get 2 counters on this, it's absurd. And once you have access to your first Mystical Teachings with 2 counters on Mindsplice Apparatus, the game seriously feels unlosable. I think that's the draw of this deck. I think that this is... I think you turn the corner faster than a blue-black control deck generally would, and I think that you turn the corner harder in that you are more guaranteed to win the game. You just don't have a fizzle chance as far as a control deck goes, because you're going to be able to generate practically infinite value with the Mystical Teachings, Gifts Ungiven, Memory Deluge, which Memory Deluge is funny. Obviously, this card cares about how much mana you spent on it, which is hilarious when you discount it. But even if you have full Mindsplice Apparatus going, it's blue at instant speed to look at the top 2 cards of your library and put them into your hand. look, I'm happy to play 2-mana instant speed divination. This card is really good, actually. I could see being off some number of hieroglyphics and just going up on this. I don't think I would play a 4th Mindsplice. 3 felt pretty good, especially because I have no way to discard them, but it is pretty important, so maybe, I don't know, maybe you go to 4 because it's so critical to get 1 in play on turn 4 or 5 if you're not forced to interact, that maybe you can just sometimes draw additional copies that you don't want. So anyway, I think this is a very reasonable take on a blue-black control list. I don't know if I would say it's like better than not doing the Mindsplice Mystical Teachings thing, but I have a suspicion that it is better. And it's going to take some time to iron it out, because this is a toolboxy deck with Mystical Teachings and Gifts Ungiven, so it's going to take some time to get the exact right configuration. I think my win cons are currently wrong. I was looking at some cards, and you're not going to be able to see one of them because of where my face is. I think Capsize might just be the way to win the game, truthfully. Once you're on Mindsplice Apparatus, this is blue to bounce a permanent with buyback. That's insanity. And if you can bounce all of your opponent's lands, which you just can with this, then you're free to just win the game with a Creeping Tar Pit, right? Like, it doesn't matter. They're not getting out of that. It's tutorable. It's an okay piece of interaction. Just fired off with no buyback for 1 blue. I don't hate that. And maybe this just goes in the Hullbreaker Horror spot. Hullbreaker Horror is hard to interact with, but my opponent's probably going to have all of their removal in their hand, because my only viable target is Baleful Strix. So when it comes time to cast Hullbreaker Horror, Mono Black's probably going to have a couple Defiles left that I'm going to have to fight through. So maybe I just Capsize people. Forget it. Just win like that. I was looking at Shadow's Verdict. This is a sorcery, unfortunately. But I really want to have this for access to for specifically Martyr proc. It's really good against. So that got me thinking about Silver Bullet sorceries I could play, because theoretically you would have a path to them with like Mystical Teachings for Gifts Ungiven, and then your Gifts pile could be the sorcery you want to cast, and you could get 2 cards that let you flashback a card from your graveyard. There's Flood of Recollection, which is a sorcery, and there's the Surveil one. Blue Surveil 2, and then you can flash something back from your graveyard. I'm blanking on it. So you could make it so you could tutor up a Shadow's Verdict or something. And the last card that you don't see over here is Torrential Gearhulk. Actually, Torrential Gearhulk. The card is $2.36, but I think it might be worth it. I think it represents really interesting. It's really interesting to be able to like flashback your Gifts Ungiven with a Torrential Gearhulk, or a Dig Through Time, something like that. It is also just a beater, so maybe I get rid of the Hullbreaker Horror and put in like 1 Gearhulk, 1 Capsize or something as my win condition. And then at that point I could free up the sideboard slots of Commence the Endgame and Lockmare Serpent. Those just are not necessary. So maybe that's how I'll do it going forward. I think that's fairly reasonable. A couple other cards I was thinking about. I'm really actually interested in having access to 1 Frantic Search. That's 2 and a blue instant. Draw 2 cards, pitch 2 cards, untap 3 lands. And I think that hypothetically, once you get on Mindsplice Apparatus, you could do some pretty nutty things on the end stuff, like almost storming off. You could like Mystical Teachings for Frantic Search, then cast Frantic Search for 1 mana, then flash back your Teachings, get another Teachings, and cast that twice or something. Additionally, it would let you discard extra copies of Mindsplice Apparatus, so maybe that would allow you to go up to 4 of them. Another card that I think is really interesting, this is an old card. This is part of the beauty of the format. Venarian Glimmer. It is a really weird way to make people discard. It's an X spell, so it synergizes pretty well with Mindsplice Apparatus, and it lets you rip their card out of their hand in their draw step. Is that better than just being a counterspell? I don't know, probably not, but it's kind of cute, don't you think? So that's the deck. Let me know what you guys think. I think it's got legs. I think it's here to stay. I might play it on Monday night with some revisions. I'll go over my matchups really quick. We were an 8-person tournament, which is fine. It was a good turnout. We played some good matches. I played round 1 against recent Pro Tour competitor, Mike Belfato. Loved to play against him. Very good Magic player. He was borrowing Chris's Mono Black Aggro Knights variant. I won that match. There were a couple interesting things that happened. It kind of went how you would expect. Game 3, I was able to stabilize by casting a March of Wretched Sorrow, X equals 11, and gain enough life to make winning the game pretty reasonable from there. Languish did a lot of work, and Baleful Strix also did a lot of work, honestly. Felt like a pretty winnable matchup, which makes me feel better about playing this deck going forward. Round 2, I played against Andrew, my roommate, the Artifact Enjoyer. He was playing Blue-White and Soul Artifact. It made me wish I had energy fluxes on my sideboard. I think it's a mistake to play a blue deck and not have 2 energy fluxes. The cards are very good in matchups that are tough because they're good decks. Blue, White, and Soul is very good. Mono Blue Affinity is very good. I think it's worth dedicating 2 slots to energy fluxes, so I'll do that going forward. Interesting thing, Game 3, he played an early Blackstaff of Waterdeep. I was able to remove one, I think, Ancient Den that was activated, then block a little bit with like some Baleful Strixes on an indestructible land. Then he developed 3 Machiko's Reign of Truths in a row. I was able to not get killed by them, which is a feat in its own, and they were starting to flip. And they were offset by a turn or 2, so they would flip and then like pump the next one. Luckily, I had my 1 copy of the Filigree Silex, and my plan was to tick it up to 2 and then wipe all of them because those were his only threats at the time. So I did that. I cracked it on my turn, and he had double Blacksmith skill to protect the 2 that were creatures, and then I died. It was a good match, though. It was a really good match. I think he played it well, and I don't think it would be... I think you can win it without Energy Flux, and Energy Flux can make you favored. Match 3, I played against Will on Martyr Proc. He's got some really interesting new technologies going in it. He's actually playing, I think, 2 copies of Luris main board, not companioned, sort of as a Biding Grace 5 and 6. And then he's got 2 copies of White Plume Adventurer, so I did get to bring in my Nemesis Trap, which is actually very fun. Game 1 was a slog. I believe I won Game 1. I got 2 Mindsplice Apparatuses in play, up to 5 counters on each of them. He was at 42 life. I put a Hullbreaker Horror into play, and then over the course of 4 turns, attacked with Creeping Tar Pit and Hullbreaker Horror, using the Hullbreaker Horror triggers to keep creatures clear and stopping him from getting anything cool out of his graveyard. Game 2, I forget exactly what happened. I think there was I think he just did Martyr things. I don't know. He got in a Biding Grace and stuck it and started making Angels or something, probably. Game 3, we went to time, and we did take a draw. It was a pretty hard-fought battle. Languish was important. When we ended up on time, he had 2 Abiding Grace in play, which is good for him. I had a Mindsplice Apparatus on 2 or 3 counters. But I think I had just wiped his board with a Languish and exiled most of his graveyard with a Soul Guide Lantern. And I forget the context of my hand. I think he was Hellbent, so I think I was in a pretty winning position from there. But he's always a top deck away from getting something good, so it could have not gone my way even if we had enough time. Overall, it also felt like a pretty winnable matchup. You do have to worry about the Kami lock, so you either have to counter and exile the Kami, not let an Abiding Grace resolve, or use Hullbreaker Horror to disrupt it in some capacity. I think that if I switch to a Capsize game plan, that would be even better, because I don't think that Mono White Martyr has a ton of recourse to getting capsized out, so maybe that's another reason to go on the Capsize plan. So I finished up as 1-1-1, which is a pretty odd record. But I felt really positive about it. Beating Mono Black is awesome. There's a lot of that in our local metagame. Playing a pretty close match against Blue, White, and Soul, also good. That deck's very strong. And then having game against Martyr makes me feel like this deck's in a pretty good place. I felt like I wasn't getting rolled over. Initiative is scary for sure. I think Nemesis Trap actually helps a lot. So I don't know, those are my thoughts. Let me know if you guys have ideas on how the deck should be formatted, but overall, it felt really strong. I think there's a huge appeal in Mindsplice and Mystical Apparatus. Nope, that's Mindsplice Apparatus, Mystical Teachings. I think these cards are both good, and they work really well together. There's a lot of fan appeal in playing Mystical Teachings, and I think this deck's just straight up strong enough. So, if you think this is your kind of deck, you should definitely check it out. I think that this is good enough to exist in the format, and maybe better minds than mine can get it to be really good. So that's all I got, guys. Like I said, check out that Channel Fireball article. Join the Discord if you aren't already. We'll be running another tournament. I don't know, maybe June 8th, maybe June 15th. I'm not really sure. I'll lock in a date pretty quick here and get that information out. But again, this has been Rusty with $30 Budget Vintage. Thanks for tuning in, and keep on brewing.